I thought I'd show you how to make a website like this one. It's very common today to see sites that use what are called panes or panels. The panes are basically sections of the page that divided up vertically. So at the top, of course, we have a header and then a navigation. The items below that for Acme's commitment and about are part of a pane as well, but this one has a background image that it scrolls over in what's called a parallax scrolling effect. The next pane has white in the background. At this layout, it has 3 icons with text. And down below, we actually have another pane, which includes a background image again. And this time it has, at this layout, 4 columns with social media information in it. And then finally, there's a footer. You'll notice that it is fully responsive as we go back to the mobile layout. Again, everything is laid out one above the other. As we bring this out wider, you'll notice, for example, that things start to change. We get the Acme's commitment section and the about over here on the same row. The social media icons and the text with them, we go on to 2 to a row as well. And there's another breakpoint coming up we'll look at. And you'll notice out here that social media actually goes 4 to a row. So 2 breakpoints. But mainly we want to show you how to do these panes here. It's always a good idea to draw out things like column lines and row lines. In this case, it's going to be fairly simple with column lines. We are going to do a 12-column layout for all 3 of these. I've indicated the row lines here because that's what gets a little bit tricky in this situation. You have situations where in one layout, something's going to be part of one row, and in another layout, it's going to be part of another row. This will become more clear as we look at it and we actually create the page. But we're going to come back and look at this from time to time to reference what we are needing to put into the code for things like row lines. And the column lines, it'll help us there as well because we can sort of see visually how much of the 12 columns some of these columns are going to need to take up. Let's go back to our learning folder and open the file setup.html. We're going to open that with brackets. You'll recall that the setup.html file is a file we created so we don't need to type in some of the basic tags every time. If you don't have this file, you'll want to create it. I'll leave it on the screen for just a moment, or you can pause the video. But this document contains all of the basic tags. It has added, of course, the meta viewport tag, which will help with responsiveness. This material in the style section is for what's called box sizing. And finally, down below, there's some very simple HTML, but we have started with a container because we will need a container for about every page we do. Once you've typed in all of this information from top to bottom, let's save the document with a different name. So File, Save As. And I'm going to call this panes.html, P-A-N-E-S.html. We're doing the mobile layout first, the one on the left. So we're going to type in the content we need here to make these divs or these elements. We are going to use HTML5 terms where we can, so we're going to start with the term header. Inside the header, we're going to need to have Acme Industries, but we're going to do that inside an H1. Like so. And that's all that's going to go in the header. The next item we'll need will be a nav. And inside the nav, we're going to do an unordered list with 3 list items. Item 1, item 2, and item 3. That's essentially all we're going to do for the nav. Let's go down now and do the next section. Let's go back and look at it in our document. The Acme's commitment right here is going to be what's called a section. When we do the about area down below that, that's going to be the aside. So we're going to put that content into HTML5 elements, section, and aside. So we type in section. And we're going to need a fair amount of content here. So we're going to do this in an H2 first of all and put in the title Acme's commitment. We're next going to put in a paragraph tag. And inside the paragraph, we're going to type out some text. Doesn't matter much what you type. I'm going to need a little bit more of that, so I'm going to copy and paste what I typed there. I'm actually going to do another paragraph, so I'm going to copy that paragraph in its entirety. I'm going to paste that down below it. So now we have an H2 within the section, and we have 2 paragraphs of text. The next thing we need is to have an aside. And the aside is going to have the about material in it. So we're going to do another H2 with the word about in it. We'll want some text below that, so we'll put in a paragraph. The first thing we want in this is an image. So we're going to put in the image tag. And it's going to be acme.jpg in an images folder. So keep in mind that what we want to do here is download the images folder, make sure that's in your learning folder as well, so that this path will work. Images/acme.jpg to make that image appear. I'm going to go and put a BR tag before the closing P tag, and then I'm going to put some text underneath this. I'm going to type the following. We began business in 1963 in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And we're going to copy and paste that at least a couple of times. And there's our closing tag for that. So there's the aside section, right? The aside contains the about in an H2. It has an image, and then below that will be some text. After the aside, we need to name the elements that will go below that. And we're going to use not HTML5 element names, but rather class names. The reason for that is, if you look at our layout back here, these boxes for product, service, and quality don't have HTML5 names that seem readily applicable. So we're going to just give them class names. So after the aside, we're going to put in a generic element or a div open, div close. And the first one, if we go back and look at it, is actually going to be a class name that pertains to the layout we expect it to be for the laptop desktop. We're going to use that as a naming convention. So for example, the products, service, and quality that we see on the right side of the screen, those boxes are all part of what is really the fourth pane or block down, right? If you start at the top of the layout, Acme Industries, the header would be the pane number 1. Navigation would be pane number 2. The section and aside above it is pane 3. So as a naming convention, we're going to call the first item below that, the products, we're going to call it block 4. And since it's really in the first of what are 3 columns in the look of the page, we'll call it block 4, column 1. Service we'll call block 4, column 2. And quality we'll call block 4, column 3. So this is a div. We're going to need a class name. And as I said, we're going to call it block 4, column 1. Inside this, we're going to begin with an H3 tag, and it's going to say products. We're going to follow that up with a paragraph. First thing inside this paragraph is going to be an image. Inside there, we type the path, which is images / and this one is going to be called acme1.jpg. We'll put in a BR after that. We'll put some text in here next. We have the industry best products. Copy and paste that just a few times. Let's copy and paste that again. This will be block 4, column 2. Instead of products, this one is going to say service. This one will use Acme 2, but this one is not a JPEG. Be careful here. Make sure you put ping. I have provided a PNG file for you for this particular image. Acme2.ping. It looks like that one. I'll change the text just a little bit. We have great customer service. We'll copy and paste that again. We're now in block 4, column 3. This one is going to be using an image called Acme 3. And this one is a JPEG again, so let's put that back to JPEG. By the way, I need to change these headers as well, so make sure I follow along. We're going to call this one quality. H3 is quality. Okay, acme3.jpg is in there. Let's change the text just a little bit. And again, we'll copy and paste that a few times. Okay, that should end that. We have 3 items with divs for the next block. So this pane or panel is going to be block 4, column 1, block 4, column 2, and block 4, column 3. The next div, the next generic element we'll look at is going to be for the social items. We're going to need 4 of those. We're going to call that block 5. If you look on the right side of your screen, starting at the top, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panes there. That's the 5th pane from the top. So we're going to call those block 5, column 1 for Facebook, block 5, column 2 for Twitter, block 5, column 3 for Instagram, block 5, column 4 for Pinterest. Let's start this by copying and pasting some of the code to save some time in typing. The first block 5 element is called block 5, column 1. You will not need the header in it, so we're going to remove that. We're going to change this image name now to social-facebook.png. Be careful here. This is a ping image. Let's take a look at why. The social media icons you see are white circles. And you'll notice that the outside edges have been cut away to be transparent so you can see an image underneath them. Pings will support that transparency, JPEGs will not. So I've provided for you ping images for this. This first one is called social-facebook.png. Brackets is showing what that looks like, and it shows a checkerboard pattern around the edges indicating that that is the area that is transparent. Let's change the text inside here. Connect with us on Facebook. And we've copied and pasted that a few times. That should finish block 5, column 1. That will make the social icon show up. There'll be a break underneath with some text. So let's copy and paste that entire generic element. Next one is block 5, column 2. It'll be social-twitter.ping. We'll change some of the text down below. Next, we'll copy and paste that to make block 5, column 3 out of it. Block 5, column 3, we'll use an image called social-Instagram. We will change some of that text. Let's copy and paste some of that text. Let's copy and paste now that block. This will be a class called block 5, column 4. It will use an image called social-pinterest.ping. And we're changing that text down below as well. One of last element we need is going to be a footer. We're going to use an HTML5 element name for that. I'm going to put this inside p tags, and I'm going to begin with what's called a character entity to create the copyright symbol. That is ampersand copy semicolon. All right, I think I have all of the content into the HTML. Let's save that and let's go back and look at it. It's not nicely laid out yet, but at least you can see the content is there. This will be the header at the top with Acme Industries. These items here are going to be the navigation. We have the commitment, which is in the section, about, which is in the assign. We go on down the page, we have products, which is going to be that block 4, column 1, etc., etc., etc. Right on down the list. Everything shows up, everything's there. To do the layout for this page with CSS, we're going to use a 12-column layout on all 3 of these layouts. So even mobile will use a 12-column layout. We could do that differently. We could certainly do mobile at 1 column and then change it when we get to the next breakpoint to maybe 3 columns, which actually wouldn't work because we couldn't get the social icons to be 2 on a row with 3 columns. But 12 will work well for all 3 layouts, so that's what we're going to go with. Before we start coding that, we're going to put in some general styles. We could do this in an external style sheet. That would make a lot of sense, but I'm just going to do it within the same document here as internal CSS. So at the bottom of the style open section and style close section, just before the style close tag, I'm going to put in some general styles that I want to pertain to the page broadly. So we're going to first of all style the body a little bit. So I type out the body tag. The selector is body. And here's something we do on a lot of pages to make sure the layout will go all the way to the top of the browser window. So we type margin top and we simply do 0. I'm going to give it a little nicer font family than the default one by typing font-family, and I'll just state Verdana. And we're going to give all the elements on the page a basic starting color of $EEE. This works well because instead of using black text on a white background, it gives it a slightly off black towards gray, and I think that just looks a little bit better. Another thing we want to do on all of our pages is make the images appear properly, so we're going to put in the image as a selector. So all the images on these pages will probably need this. It's the kind of thing you'll likely do on every page you create. Max width 100%. Height colon auto. And while we're here, let's go ahead and style the list items a little bit as well. So to do that, we're going to type out nav space ul space li. And we're going to type display colon inline list dash style dash type, and this one will be none. Let's see what that does to the page right now. Let's save this. So that makes the changes we intended. Do notice that the light gray text doesn't look good on the current background, but also notice that the list items now are across on 1 row. The next thing we're going to do is start to write some of the CSS for CSS Grid. We begin with the container. You do recall we have a container here that surrounds all of the elements inside. That's the open tag there. Down here is the closing div tag for the container. So we want to turn that into a grid container, and we're going to come up to the style section and simply type .container. Put in our 2 braces, and as we always do, we start with display colon grid. I said we're going to do a 12-column layout, so we'll type out grid dash template dash columns, and I'm going to use the repeat function here, 12 comma 1 fr. So that should give us a 12-column layout. Let's give it some grid auto rows as well. We'll use the min-max function. And we'll make sure that each row goes at least 60 pixels high, and at 1 FR for the maximum. We're going to give it a max width as well. I'm going to give it a very high max width at 1920 pixels. This is simply to make sure that for people who have very large screens, very high resolution, that the layout doesn't keep going forever across the width of the page. At this point, we also want to put in margin : 0 auto. And while we're here, let's give it a background color for the container. I'm going to use the RGBA system this time. Inside those parentheses, I'm going to type out the red value first, which will be 30, then 30 again, red, green, and blue, and finally the transparency will be 0.3. Also, I'm going to come up above that and I'm going to type another general style. This is going to be container greater than star to affect all the elements inside the grid container, all of the grid items. And I simply want to add a little padding to that. I'm going to do a 0.5 EM top and bottom. And I'm going to do actually 1 EM left and right. All right, but the main thing is we made the container here, and we did a display grid. We set up a 12-column layout. We gave it a minimum height for the rows of 60 pixels with a maximum of 1 FR. The max width we added, the margin 0 auto, and finally a background color. We could look at that. And there's the background color. We've done nothing else with the layout. The next thing we're going to style is going to be the header. And all of these now for the mobile layout are going to be grid column 1/13. The header is going to need a grid row designation. Let me type this out first of all, and then we'll come back. Let's go back and look at our layout. So when we look at the layout here, you can see that for mobile, everything's going to stretch out across the entire layout. But I have put in row line designations as well. And in all of the layouts, you'll notice that Acme Industries, the header needs to go from row line 1 to row line 3. So I'm indicating that it's going to take up 2 rows. So we'll need to specify that. So grid rows will be 1/3, like that. Let's add the text align again as well, to center it. And we're going to give it a background color. We'll use a hexadecimal value of E08965. And you'll notice there I have an extra colon. We'll remove that. Let's just look at that for a moment. And there's Acme Industries with the background color. It is 2 rows high. Well, that's the start. Let's keep coding. After the header, we have the nav. So the selector is the HTML5 element name nav. It will need, like the others, the same grid column designation. I can copy and paste that, save a little bit of typing. Grid column 1/13. We're not going to specify any row lines because it's only going to take 1 row, and it will do that implicitly. We do want to text align center. And we're going to give it a background color. This particular background color will be # E2 D8 AF semicolon. Let's look at that one more time at least. And there's the background color there, kind of a beige color. The next thing is going to be section. It will also use grid dash column 1/13. That's basically all I'm going to do for the section. The next one is an aside. grid column 1/13. I'm going to put text align center on this one as well. There's my aside. Now the next CSS to write is going to be for a class, right? Because if you remember the boxes in order after the aside, let's go down to the HTML. Here's the aside. We next use a generic element div with the class name of block 4 column 1. So we need to write the code for block 4 column 1, which is really the first box on that row that contains the products, services, and quality. So let's go back up and write the code for that. After the aside, we put in block 4 column 1. Like all of them for mobile, it'll be grid column 1/13. I'm going to give the content inside the box a color of #666. I'm going to add text align center. I'm going to give it a border at the top as well. Solid 2 pixels. I'll give it a value of #888, which is sort of a medium gray. I'm also going to give it a background color. I could type white here, or I could do this value, $FFF. We're going to do much the same thing on the next block, so we'll copy that. There's block 4 column 2. We'll use the same grid column designations, the same color, the same text align, the same border top, and the same background color. So we should be fine there. We'll paste that again. So it'll be block 4 column 3 with everything there staying the same. The next item to write is going to be a class for block 5 column 1. Let's go back and look at why. Block 5, you'll remember, contains the social media items, and that one is going to be, of course, 1/13 for all of the columns as well. But we've called it block 5 because if you'll notice, starting from the top on the right side, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th block down, so to speak. So that's the naming system we came up with. We'll go back to our code and write some CSS. Let's actually copy and paste some of this. The first one's going to be called block 5 column 1. Block 5 column 1 will use the same grid column designations. We're going to actually remove the color though. We're going to leave in the text align center. And we're going to get rid of the background color because these are going to go on top of an image in the background. So we only need to have the grid column, the text align, and the border top for block 5 column 1. We'll need something very similar to that for the next one, so we'll copy that. There's block 5 column 2. We'll keep going with that. Block 5 column 3. And block 5 column 4. And finally, we'll need a footer. It's going to use much of the same kind of thing as up above, so I'm going to copy and paste some of that. You'll need the grid column, the text align center, the border at the top. It's also going to get a background color. The value there will be #96 B7 C6. All right, there's the CSS for the basic mobile layout. Let's take a look at that. We'll look at it a little more narrowly. You can see how everything stacks and is in the right location, even the footer down at the bottom with a slightly blue color. We have not put the background images underneath the social media icon. nor have we put the background image in underneath the section and the aside here yet. But at least the mobile layout works just fine for now. Next up, we want to get the background images in. As you can see from this layout, underneath the section and the aside for all of the layouts, there's a background image there. On the left side, we're talking about Acme's commitment and about, those two blocks. That background image will need to be underneath both of those, but they're stacked on top of each other for the mobile layout. For the next layout at 620 pixels, we're going to change that layout to be side by side, but both will still need a background image underneath. Let's go back and start to code that. We are essentially going to create an empty element name. What does that mean? Let's go down here to where we expect it to largely go. It doesn't actually matter too much here because it's going to be an empty element. But I'm going to go back down here to just before the section, and I'm going to put in another div. I'm going to give it a class name of block 3-back. I'm not going to put anything inside this div. It's going to be what's called an empty element. What I can do though is I can use this div to essentially put a background image that will be assigned to the class block 3-back. So just do this for now. Put in this empty element div. You can put it in here just above the section in the HTML. And let's now write the CSS for that. We're going to do that up here. We'll do it in just before the section. It doesn't really matter, but this is a good place to have it, to find it again later. And let's write the class name block 3-back. So the selector is the class block 3-back, that empty element we just created. We're going to give it the designations for grid columns, 1/13. We're going to also need to give it a grid row designation. Let's go back and look at what that should be. The grid rows for block 3-back. On the left side of your screen, we're looking at the Acme's commitment in the About section, and as you'll notice that that's going to span 2 rows. So the background image that's going to go in block 3-back is going to go from row line 4 to row line 6 for mobile. So that's what we're going to type, 4/6, which will give us those 2 rows. Next, I'm going to put a background image in here. So I type out background-image, colon, URL, 2 parentheses, semicolon. Now inside the parentheses will be the URL path, which would be images / this one is called back1.jpg. back1-jpg. Now there are a few other items we need to put in here, including background-repeat, colon, no-repeat. We don't want the background image to repeat at all. The background position will be center, space, center. This means that if the background image doesn't show up in its entirety, it will start showing it from the center vertically and horizontally. Background attachment next. This one's going to say fixed. This is what's going to allow the parallel scrolling effect, so essentially it won't move when scrolling. And we're going to need one more. Background-size, colon is going to say cover. Let's see if that works. So think of what we did. We wrote a class down below, an element name, called an element name with a class of block 3-back. There it is, block 3-back. Next thing we want to do is put in row designations for those items that will go on top of that. So essentially we're going to put in for a grid row for section. And it's going to go on row 4, essentially 4/5. Now when we type it out that way, if we're only going to go 1 row, we can simply tell it the row number, which is row 4, like that. That's the same thing as 4/5. So I'll type grid row 4. We'll need to do a grid row for the assign. Now we'll go grid row 5. So essentially this is 4/6. This will go on the first of those 2 rows, and this will go on the bottom of those 2 rows. Let's save it and check it. And there you have it. We're doing mobile, so we'll look at it a little more narrowly. That works. So let's go back and do the same thing now for the block 5 background. Remember, block 4 will have a white background, so we won't need to do it there, but we'll put into the HTML down below here now another empty generic div. Give it a class name of block 5 dash back. Just like we did with block 3 back, we'll put that in there. We'll go up to the CSS. I'll put it up here. We're going to need something very similar here, so let me copy and paste some of this code. Now it will need grid columns 1/13, but we're going to need to change the grid rows here. Let's go back and look at that. So the background for block 5 on mobile is going to need to go from row line 9 to row line 13. All right, you can see that on the left-hand side. I've indicated the row line numbers. Line 9 to 13 will encompass the entire layout of rows for that background image. So grid rows will be 9/13. The background image is going to use something called back2.jpg. Like we did before, let's give the grid row designations to the other block 5 elements. So block 5 column 1 will need a grid row as well. Block 5 column 1 back here is the Facebook area on the left side. It will go in row 9, or from row line 9 to row line 10. I'll simply type 9. The next ones are going to go down to the next rows. Row line 10. Block 5 column 3 will go row line 11, rather row 11. And block 5 column 4 will go on grid row 12. Let's save that. And we'll check it. And there we have the image behind, just as we had intended. It's a good idea to add ZIndex to some of these, because if the stacking changed in some way, we wouldn't be having the situation where the background is showing behind the icons and text. It would be the opposite potentially. So that's a good idea to add that. To do that, we're going to do the same thing for block 3. Here's block 3 back. I'm going to add to this Z-index :1. Z-index would make sure that we know what goes on top of what. So Z-index of 1 for the background, Z-index of 2 for the section, making sure that it stays on top of block 3 back, and we'll give the Z-index to the aside the same number of 2. We'll do something similar with the block 5 background. We'll give it a Z-index of 1, and we'll put the elements that go on top of that as Z-index of 2. So block 5 column 1, block 5 column 2, block 5 column 3, and block 5 column 4. Let's double check, make sure everything's still working properly. And there we have it. A complete mobile layout from top to bottom. The next thing we need to write is what's called a media query, because we want the layout to change when we get to a certain number of pixels. We're looking at the middle image here. So we're trying to determine what changes between the one on the left, which is mobile, and the one in the middle, which will be at a certain number of pixels. Well, the header and the navigation don't change. They'll use the same row numbers, the same column numbers. What will change though will be the layout of the section and the aside, the Acme's commitment and the about, because while they are on top of each other for mobile, at this next layout, it's going to change to be side by side. The section will take up 2/3 of the layout, or 8 columns, and the about will take up 1/3 of the layout, or 4 columns. We need to write that for a change in a media query. So if you remember how to do a media query, we're going to go down below the CSS we've written, because the CSS we've written is essentially for mobile. It's kind of the default CSS. And we're going to write the following: at media space only space screen space and space parentheses. I'll put my 2 braces in first. Actually going to take the indentation back here just a little bit. Inside these parentheses here, we need to tell it what to do, when to change the layout. So we're going to type a min-width colon, and I'm going to use the value 620 pixels. So when the browser width reaches 620 pixels or wider, it will start to use this CSS. Recall that we don't need to write CSS for things that don't change, only the things that change. So we're not going to write any CSS here for the header or the navigation, but we are going to start with block 3 back, because that needs to change. What is block 3 back going to do? The image for block 3 back on mobile is going to go from row line 4 to row line 6, but when we get to the next layout, it's going to go from row line 4 to row line 5, the one in the middle there. So the image you see under Acme's commitment and about needs to change at this media query. So we'll type that in, dot block 3 dash back. Now we're going to go ahead and type in the grid column designation as well, just because it'll help us keep track of what we're doing, but we shouldn't need it because it doesn't change from the layout above, which is the mobile or default CSS. Grid column 1/13. The grid row we just determined is going to be as follows here. It's going to go 4/5, right? Let's go back and look at that. Middle image. The background image there is on row line 4 to row line 5. Remember, we could just write row line 4 if we want to, because it's only going 1 row. That should change the layout for that. What else changes? Well, let's type in the next element that changes. It's going to be the section. Remember, the section spanned all 13 columns on mobile, but here it's going to span 2/3 of the layout, or the first 8 columns. So the section grid columns needs to change to grid-column colon 1/9 to make it go in the first 8 columns. I'm going to tell it what grid row to go on so that that doesn't get messed up. Grid row is going to go on 4 as well, just like the background went on that row. And the aside is going to do something fairly similar. In fact, exactly similar except for the grid column change. That one, instead of going 1/9, will go 9/13, taking up the last 4 columns of that layout. So we've changed the section and the aside as well. What else changes on this layout? Well, from the image on the left to the image on the right, we certainly need to change the locations of the products, service, and quality. We'll write those items. So the selector there is a class name of .block 4 column 1. The grid column designation here will change. Again, we'll go back. In the middle image, we're looking at the products image. That product section will need to change now to be on 1/3 of the layout as far as the columns go. So the first 4 columns essentially for the products. So for products, we're going to type in block 4 column 1. We'll go column lines 1/5. We'll tell it what grid row to go on as well, and that happens to be now row 5. It's going to be below the section and the aside. Let's take and copy and paste that, block 4 column 1. And we'll make block 4 column 2 will go now the next columns, which will be 5 to 9. It will also go on grid row 5. And the next one we'll type in block 4, column 3, which will go grid columns 9 to 13, also staying on grid row 5. So there are the 4 items for products, service, and quality. And we've changed that to a 3-column layout, meaning that block 4, column 1 will span the first 4 columns. Grid 4, column 2 will span the next 4. And block 4, column 3 here will span the last 4 with 9/13. All on the same row, row line 5. Or rather row 5, row line 5/6 if you want to type it out that way. The next thing that's going to change. Social media. Now Facebook and Twitter need to be on the same row and each taking half of the layout. They're going to be on row 6. So let's copy and paste a little bit of this to save some typing. So this will be block 5, column 1. And block 5, column line is going to go half the layout, so it'll go 1/7. We said that it's going to go on grid row 6. That's block 5, column 1. Block 5, column 2 will go from column line 7 to 13, taking up the right side, the right half of the layout. It will also go on grid row 6. Next is going to be block 5, column 3. It will go back to 1/7. It's going to go down to the next row, which is row 7. And block 5, column 4 will go the right side of the layout, 7 through 13 for column lines, also on grid row 7. Looking at the middle image, you can see the social media icons and text down there. The background image there is going to need to go from grid row 6, grid row line 6 to grid row line 8. It will use the grid column designation that we've used before, which will be 1/13. The important thing here is though the grid row designation, which will need to go 6/8. Let's add something for the footer down here as well to make sure that it goes in the right location. I'm going to put in here grid row 8. We could add columns if we want, just to keep track, but that didn't change, so we didn't really need this. See what happens when it goes wider. There's the breakpoint right here from mobile to 620 pixels, and everything's working just fine. You'll notice that the social media icons are now 2 on a row. All right, the next thing we're going to do is write one more media query. We're going to change the layout one more time. All that's going to change is going to be the social. Everything else will stay the same from the 620 media query. So all the social icons are now going to go on the same row. We'll go down below the media query we wrote before. Actually, let's go back up here now and copy the media query information we had from before. The opening media query. That's going to go below the media query above it there. I'll change my indentation just a little bit. Okay, so the next CSS is going to go within this. So let's change the layout for those 4 boxes we were just looking at. The first one is dot block 5, column 1. It's going to go from grid column, let's check it. Looking at the image on the right side, the Facebook icon, as you can see, takes up 1/4 of the layout. So that would be 3 of the columns in the 12-column layout. So it will be grid column 1/4. It will go on grid row 6, and that's all we should need there. We'll copy and paste that again. Block 5, column 2. We'll go from column line 4 to 7, staying on the same row, row 6. Block 5, column 3 will go from 7 to 10. And block 5, column 4 will go from 10 to 13. And we better go up here and change this to be a bigger number at 900 pixels. So this media query here is going to be for the case where the browser's width is 900 pixels or greater. So a third layout. We'll save that. There's our middle layout. And there's the final one. So there you have it, a complete layout with background images and panels. Fully responsive, and we're finished. Now that we've completed the document panes.html, we're going to add a couple of wrinkles. The first wrinkle is going to be to add what's called a tabbed heading to one of the sections below. You can see it here as I scroll up on the page at this width. It says section heading right here on top of a white, what looks like a folder tab. To create that, we have more than one way we could do that in CSS Grid. One way we could do it is to place the CSS to make this appear in the bottom of the section above it, which is called block 3, and it contains the section and aside as well. Another way to do it would be to add it to the section below. And by adding it to the section below, we could essentially make the tab stick up above that section by using a negative top margin. It will become more clear as we do it. We're going to choose the latter method for doing it, but I want you to notice that this is responsive as well. As we get narrower, you can see the tab there with one column. It's actually 12 columns, but it spans all 12, so it looks like one column on the page. And as you go wider, of course, the tab continues in its location. To create this, we're going to start with the document panes.html that we've been working on. So we're going to go back to brackets, and here it is. The first thing we're going to do is write in the HTML we'll need. I'm going to place that down here in the same area where I expect it to appear in the HTML, below the aside and before block 4, column 1. Very simply, we're going to write out this HTML. We're going to do a div with a class name. We're going to call the class name tab. We'll go up and write the CSS in a moment. And inside that div, we're going to put in the word section heading. Now, I do want to add a p tag around this. And then I'm going to add a little bit of inline CSS to this p, to this paragraph. I'll add the following: style equals, inside quotes, I'm going to put in a margin top, in this case, 8 pixels, like that. We're only doing this because we want to have a little bit of space above the word section heading in the tab itself. This is not going to position the actual tab. We're going to do that with some internal CSS in just a moment. So let's get rid of some of the space here. And let's go back up to the CSS section, and let's place the CSS into the mobile default area, the top CSS. And we're going to put in way up here in the approximate location where we would expect it to appear on the page, so we'll be able to find the CSS easily if we come back to the document and look for it. All right, this is a div with a class of tab we're working on, so we're going to type .tab, put in our 2 braces, and we're going to first designate where we want it to go. So let me just type this in and we'll explain it in a moment. So we're going to do grid-column, colon 5/9. Remember, we have a 12-column layout here, and we don't want this tab to span the width of the layout at mobile. We want it to take up a part of that. And so the location we want is going to be designated as 5/9 for the column line numbers. We're going to give this a grid row designation as well, so we make sure it shows up in the right row. This is going to go in row 6. First thing we're going to do is give it a ZIndex, and we're going to give it a very high ZIndex number. This is going to assure that the tab will show up on top of anything else that might be below it. So we're going to do 100 for the ZIndex. We're going to give it a background color as well. Now, for now, I'm going to give it a background color of pink, just so we can see what it's doing. Even though we're going to want it to end up being white, we're going to do a color of £444. This will be a fairly dark gray for the text that says section heading. We're going to give it a height. And for now, I'm just going to enter a height that I think is going to work, like 60 pixels. Now, if you'll notice, the tab back here has some curves in the top left and the top right, and then it goes straight down the edge and connects with the area below it. So to create these, we're going to use what's called a border radius. So adding some CSS to that, we type border dash radius, and just type what I'm typing for now, :6px space 6px space 0, 0 spaces between each of those values. This is going to put a 6-pixel radius in the top left, a 6-pixel radius on the top right, and no radius on the bottom right and bottom left. All right, so what else do we need here? Well, we're going to do some centering with something called flex. I like to use flex for basic centering of items or alignment of items or some kind of justification. So we're going to start by giving this a display property of flex. We're going to use the justify-content property, and we're going to type center. I'm also going to do just the font size while I'm here. This is going to be for mobile, so we want to probably make that font size a little smaller from its default. I'm going to enter 14px. Let's add the following. Margin dash top colon, and we're going to give this a negative number. All right, so a negative number will sort of push it outside its actual box. We're going to do -40 pixels. Save that and see what margin top -40 does. And there it is. But what it's doing so far is it's putting it into row 6, but the problem is that there's no row specification for these blocks below it, and so we're going to need to go up and add that. So to make this get fixed, we're going to need to go down here to block 4 column 1. In mobile, it's only block 4 column 1 that really needs it, but we're going to add it here to the block 4 column 1 as follows: grid dash row :6 semicolon. That's going to make the block 4 column 1 and the tabbed item above it appear on the same row, right? Because look, both are on row 6. Tab is in row 6. Block 4 column 1 is in row 6 as well. We wouldn't need to add that to block 4 column 2 and 3, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway, just so that you see what's going on here. Block 4 column 2 will get grid row 7, and block 4 column 3 will get grid row 8. Now we'll go back and check the document. Okay, it's starting to work now. It looks like it's in the right location, but we're going to change it back to white so we don't see the pink here. So let's go back to tab and change that color from pink to white. Check that. Now that works pretty well, but we have one additional problem here, and that is that the tab is going up outside of its current block or pane, which is good, but it's covering up part of the text in the aside over here. So what we're going to need to do is add a little bit of bottom padding or margin to that. And we're going to add a bottom margin of 50 pixels. We'll go up and we'll do that right now to the aside. So let's find the aside. There it is right there. We'll add to that margin dash bottom :50 pixels. We're going to add margin bottom 50 pixels to the section as well. Even though we won't need it for the mobile layout, it will get carried over into the other layouts we'll see in a while. So margin dash bottom :50 pixels. semicolon for both the section and the aside. Let's see if that fixed our problem. And there you can see what's happened. Now we're okay for mobile, but we want to make some changes to the way that looks for some of the other layouts. You can see here, for example, that the location of it is wrong when it gets to the 620 pixel media query. So we need to do some fixes there. Let's go back to that section. And here's our media query for the 620 pixels area, which is right here. And we're going to add to that a location for the tab. So we're going to correct the tab location for this width. This one's going to be a dot tab. And all we're going to give it here is a grid dash row. Remember, it was on row 6 when we were looking at the mobile layout, but it needs to change to row 5 for this layout because the section and aside scooted up into the same row. So we have one fewer row above it. So instead of being grid row 6, it needs to be grid row 5. While I'm here, I'm going to add a font size. It's a little larger than it was for the mobile. I'll do 18 pixels. Let's check that and see if that works. Refresh the page. Scroll up. And now the tab is in the right area. It's in the right area on grid row 6. Remember, grid row 6 is the section below it right here, products, Acme logo. I could probably make that text a little bit smaller so that it didn't break like that, but it'd probably be fine on a phone, something like that. And again, as we go to 620 pixels, it's in the right location. Well, that's going to be the same location for the 900 pixel media query as well, but we may want to adjust the font size just a little bit, making it even bigger for that one. So we'll go down there to the 900 pixel media query, which is right here. And we're going to add to that dot tab. And we'll give it a font dash size, 20 pixels. Let's save it. Let's check it in a browser. Let's see if the font size changes when we get to the wider browser width. Yeah, it got a little bit higher, it got a little bit larger there. And that's our tab heading. Again, we could have done this a different way. There's more than one way to do these things, usually with CSS Grid, but that worked pretty easily. Next, we're going to get rid of the tabs that we put in and do it a little differently. This one, it looks like it has clouds along the edge, and we're going to call that clouds.html in a moment. But you'll notice that we can scroll on it, and it maintains the transparency around the edge of the clouds. You only see the circles, you don't see the rest of the image, and it works just like the rest of the page did before as well, kind of a transition area to the pane below it. It works responsively. We can take this narrow, and we can make it wide, and it works the same way. Now, the clouds are actually part of an image, a PNG image or PNG document. PNG images are great because they allow you to do this transparency, so we can sort of take away the background of the image where we don't have clouds. So to do that, let's look at that image in Photoshop. As I said, it's a PNG image, a PNG document. You might be starting out with a PSD file, something you can edit. However you go about it, you need to get rid of the blue area around it here. You could use the magic wand tool, select, delete. You could use other methods as well. You might get some fringing along the edge of the white clouds if you do that, though, because anti-aliasing will put some lighter blue between the white and the dark blue. However you do it, though, you need to end up with something that looks like this. So this layer that I'm looking at in Photoshop includes the transparency effect on this layer, and that's how we'd want to save this document. So this PSD file is like this. Its size is 1920 by 235. Now 235 is not a critical number, that's just what it happened to end up being. But I chose 1920 pixels wide because I want this image to look good even at its widest setting, where browsers are going to be maybe very wide on a big monitor. We can probably safely assume that 1920 pixels is going to be enough to not make the image look blown up. Of course, when the browser gets much narrower or it's looked at on a mobile device, it won't need all of those pixels, but it will work fine at that level as well. So we're ready to save this. We would do File, Export, Export As. Make sure this says ping up here, and then we can continue on. Let's begin by getting rid of the HTML that exists for the tabs, but actually first let's resave the document. File, Save As. Change it from tab.html to clouds.html. I already have it, so I'll need to replace mine. Again, we're going to get rid of everything pertaining to the tab that we did. So the HTML right here with the div class of tab and the section heading, that whole div is going to go away now. We'll get rid of the CSS for that as well. There it was at the 900 pixel media query. Here it is at 620 pixels. And finally, there's the default CSS for mobile. Let's make sure we resave our document. We're going to use block 3 back for the panel to put it within. So we're going to put it in at the bottom of this section here that includes the section and the aside, but that also includes the block 3 dash back that does the background image back here. So it's going to be an inline image with the clouds on top of the background image that we see up in this area up here, which is called block 3 dash back. So let's go back to our HTML file. Let's find block 3 dash back, and there it is right there. So this is what we're going to work with. We already have it, it already exists. We could certainly have created a div that was its own div in the same location as block 3 back, but we might as well use what we have here. When we created this for the other document, panes, and for tab.html, we did it as what was called an empty element or a generic div with nothing inside of it. In our case now, though, we want to put something inside of it, mainly an inline image. So between the div open and div close, we're going to put in an inline image. img space src equals, and this image is in the images folder, and it's called clouds.png. Let's do that much for now, so let's save it. Let's go back and let's look at the file clouds.html in a browser. Right, it appears, but it's not in the exact location where it needs to be. Well, first thing we're going to do is get rid of some borders that exist at the top of some of these boxes below it. First thing we're going to do is get rid of the border dash top in block 4 column 1, block 4 column 2, block 4 column 3. And of course, this has nothing to do with the placement of that cloud image, but it will make it so that there won't be lines at the top of block 4, column 1, column 2, and column 3. Let's save that, and we should see how that looks. Hard to see, but right above products, services, and quality, there was a black line that's now gone. So we want to get rid of that so it wouldn't show up at the edge of the clouds. So we finished adding this to block 3 dash back. The next thing we want to do is go up to the CSS and the default CSS specifically. Go back to block 3 dash back and find the CSS we had written earlier. And that's all here. We still need all of that stuff for now. We're going to add to this, though, the following. Display, :flex. And the next item is going to be align dash items. And instead of center this time, we're going to do flex dash end. This is going to push that inline image down to the bottom of block 3 dash back, right? Because that's the CSS we're working on right now is for block 3 back. It contains a background image in it called back1.jpg. But because we've added an inline image as well, we want to make sure that that content goes to the bottom of it vertically. So display flex will allow me to do this kind of centering or justification. Align items has to do with vertical alignment. And by doing flex end, it would push it down to the bottom of the box called block 3 dash back. Let's check that so far. Next thing we need to do is fix the margin a little bit. We're going to actually do a margin of 0 on that element. And we're going to do padding of 0. Check that. And there you have it. There'll be some other little fixes we'll want to do. Mainly we want to fix the amount of space below the section and the aside, because the clouds will tend to cover that up a little bit in some of the layouts. Not so much here, but watch as we get a little wider. There you can see Shenandoah Valley of Virginia is getting on top of the clouds here a little bit, so we want to add some bottom margin there. So to fix some of that, we want to go down here to the aside and check what we have. So the aside and actually the section as well above it there both have a margin bottom of 50 pixels that is working fine for the mobile layout. Let's go down though and check the 620 pixel media query. And we don't have the same kind of thing in there, so let's look at block 3-back and section and aside. Here's the section, here's the aside. We're going to add to the section a margin, dash bottom, and I'll do 85 pixels. I think that's going to work just fine. Copy that. I'm also going to need some margin at the bottom of the aside. Where we were really having problems was at the 900 pixel media query, so we're going to go down to that section as well. And we're going to add some CSS for those. Here's section. I'm going to do 100 pixels on that. I'm going to do the same thing for the aside. All right, so I've added a little margin bottom to the section and aside for the 900 pixel media query. We'll save that. And there it is. You'll notice we now don't have the words up here showing up on top of the cloud. So it should work fine now for all resolutions. There might be one more thing we'll want to fix. You'll notice that there's some edge of white on the layout on the left side and the right side. We've been living with this through a couple of examples so far already. But if you want to get rid of that, we can fix it. We're going to go up to the default CSS to the very top, and we're going to either do this to an HTML tag or a body tag. We'll do to the body. What we want to add here to fix that on all of our pages is probably the following: margin, colon 0, and padding, colon 0, semicolon. Let's save that. And there you can see the white went away.